Welcome to Chemistry with Dr. Z. In this video, I'm going to talk about the formation of ethanol via fermentation of glucose. First, ethanol is the second member of the alcohol series, and it's an alcohol that is found in beer, wine, and other alcoholic drinks. It's used also as a fuel for vehicles, either on its own or mixed with petrol. Ethanol can be produced by fermentation of glucose using yeast and then concentration using the fractional distillation. So let's look at the production of ethanol. So fermentation of glucose using a yeast will give you carbon dioxide and ethanol. Ethanol is manufactured by the fermentation of glucose in the absence of air, and there is an optimum temperature for the fermentation, which is about 30 degrees, because they actually use an enzyme in yeast. Yeast is a type of single-celled fungus which provide the enzyme needed for the fermentation. So let's have a look at the optimum conditions for the fermentation. So fermentation is basically an enzyme reaction or enzyme catalyzed reaction. So glucose with fermentation from the enzyme from the yeast will give you carbon dioxide and ethanol. And we know that for enzymatic reaction, we will always need an optimum temperature. And the optimum temperature here is around 25 to 30 degrees. The reason for that because if the temperature is too low, the yeast that is used would be inactive. And if the temperature is too high, the enzyme in the yeast would be denatured. So it will no longer work or no longer function. The fermentation needs to be under slightly acidic condition, and also it has to be in the absence of air. The main reason for why we need to keep air away is that because if we do the fermentation in presence of air, because of the presence of oxygen, then the alcohol produced will be further oxidized to give you carboxylic acids. And we want the fermentation to stop at the production of alcohol. We don't want any carboxylic acid to be produced. So how can we concentrate the ethanol from the fermentation mixture? First of all, once the ethanol concentration reaches 15%, the yeast will die. And when the yeast die, then we have the mixture will contain, fermentation mixture will contain the yeast cells, which are insoluble, and will contain some insoluble substances in addition to the ethanol and water. So we can separate the insoluble matters or the insoluble substances and yeast by filtration. So yeast and insoluble substance can be separated by filtration, and we will end up with the filtrate. The filtrate will contain the ethanol and water. Ethanol and water then can be separated, or the ethanol can be concentrated by using fractional distillation. So fractional distillation will produce concentrated solution of ethanol. The main reason why we can use fractional distillation is because the difference in the boiling point between ethanol and water. So in fractional distillation, we're going to have the solution of the water and ethanol. It's going to be heated, and then both of them will start to evaporate, go through the fractionating column. Well, at the top of the fractionating column, the temperature will be lower, will be then enough for the ethanol to stay as vapor or in a gaseous state, while the water will then decondense back into solution. So ethanol will first pass through the condenser, and then it can be condensed and collected in the collecting vessel here, while water can then stay in the solution.